Good afternoon. My name is Fulvio Castellacci. I'm an Italian researcher. Currently, I'm director of the TIC Center, which is a department at the University of Oslo, and affiliated at NUPI, this research institute where I've been working as a researcher for many years. Today, I have the pleasure to chair this seminar about innovative state capitalism in emerging markets, the case of Kazakhstan and beyond. I have the pleasure of introducing Roman Vakulchuk, which is the author of the book, which will be the main bulk, represent the main bulk of the presentation today. Roman is now a senior research fellow at NUPI, and he holds a PhD degree in economics from Jacobs University in Bremen, in Germany. His main field of specialization is Kazakhstan, and also interested in other Central Asian economies, and in addition also Ukraine. And Roman is interested and he has published extensively on economic transition, integration, trade, infrastructure, and transport. So all fields are related to political economy with a particular focus on emerging economies in Central Asia. He has work experience as an expert with participation, coordination of many projects at NUPI and also projects led by the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. Roman has a background in institutional economics, international political economy, as I said, transition studies, and international relations. The organization of the seminar today will be that Roman will have his main presentation now for about 30 minutes. Yeah. And I will try to keep the time. So if you talk too much, I will give you an appropriate sign. And then we'll have open floor for questions and answers. So Roman, the floor is yours. Welcome and congratulations on the book. You can use this or this one. And these two shifts.
Okay. Thank you very much, Fulvio. Good afternoon, everyone. So it's like this, or? Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you at NUPI for my presentation of that is based largely, as Fulvio said, based on the results of my book on the emerging economy of Kazakhstan. And it's really, I think it's a good opportunity also for discussing the research that I've been doing over the... Thank you. Sorry for this technical delay. So yeah, it's a good opportunity also to discuss not only the book that I written and that was published, but also about the research that I also plan to do in the future. And the topic, as Fulvio rightly said, is about the innovative state capitalism. It's quite a new concept that emerged and was put forward by different scholars recently, so starting in 2010. And of course, so that you could have a sort of an idea of how the presentation would look like, I would like to introduce the concept of innovative state capitalism, its forms, its instruments, and then I will present you the in-depth case study of Kazakhstan that I looked at through the lenses of this framework of innovative state capitalism. And finally, we will come to the conclusions, where I'll present also the conclusions of my book, but also more sort of the thought-provoking questions and ideas for future research. And let me start, first of all, with presenting the quote put by Jan Bremer, who is the head of Eurasia Group think tank. In 2010, he was one of the first scholars who observed this innovative type of capitalism, of state capitalism in emerging markets. And at that time, he said that the free market tide has now receded, and its place has come state capitalism, a system in which state functions as the leading economic actor and uses markets, and uses market means primarily for political goals. So this was the first sort of observation that basically demonstrated that something has changed in terms of the structure, in terms of the governance and governance types that different countries, such as, for example, China, India, Brazil, and many others, have been using during the period from 2000 to 2010. What is meant by state capitalism, and what's the definition of it? Well, few scholars have different definitions, but the key elements and sort of the core of this definition is that it's, first of all, state ownership of companies. It's different degree of state ownership of companies, for example, that the government owns companies in China. And then it's also different degree of regulation of those companies, as well as a different degree of control and regulations of strategic and non-strategic sectors. And I will touch upon this in a couple of minutes. As for the main instruments, that's the sort of actors of this new type of state capitalism use are the following. It's a majority control and the minority control. And I will also give you some more examples of this instrument later during my presentation. Apart from that, it's also loans and equity that is used as sort of instruments by state-owned companies and also development banks. And finally, we all know that the emergence of a big number of different sovereign wealth funds and also pensions funds that are being currently developed based on the examples of leading countries in this respect, like, for example, the pension fund of Norway. Innovative state capitalism in emerging markets also has its history, and it can be classified as having three stages. The first wave of state capitalism was observed in the 19th century, and that was the first trend when it was described. The second trend took part in the period after the Second World War until the early 80s. And then the Reagan and Thatcher put forward the new concept of governance with more of a liberal approach that should be kind of the key element of any economic policies. And very recently, Nolke invented a new term for this third wave of state capitalism. He put it as state capitalism 3.0, in which he says that unlike the first two waves, now the emerging markets are becoming the main players and the main actors as regards the promotion of this new type of state capitalism. And as he describes, it's based on a variety of formal and informal relationships between the state and individual companies, as well as the strategic and the selective use of inward and outward foreign direct investments. And this use and control of foreign direct investments is seen as being at the core of this new way of innovative state capitalism. Another very important and probably one of the main characteristics of this third wave is the fact that more and more state-owned companies become multinationals. This was not the case a few decades ago, but today it's more and more the case. And one of the examples how those states were defined, for example, Fukuyama said that such a group of countries as China, Singapore, South Korea, Kazakhstan can be classified as smart authoritarian regimes, the type of the regimes that are very different from those authoritarian and semi-authoritarian regimes that existed in the 20th century. And indeed, if you look at the numbers, for example, we look at the nationality of and the origin of global corporations. Overall, we see that over 15 years, from 1996 to 2012, the share of, first of all, the BRICS countries increased from 1% in terms of the share in these global corporations up to 19%, with 15% belonging to China. At the same time, there has been also a slight increase in terms of the percentage of US companies as well as companies from the European Union, and also a sharp decrease in Japanese ownership. So this is quite an interesting trend, and it's also quite telling in terms of this internationalization strategy of companies which represent the emerging markets. And also, if you look at the concrete industries and sectors, we see that more and more companies that represent the emerging world, they become leaders in many different industries. And this is just an example of those leaders where these multinationals are among the leaders. Basically, you can see that also the countries that represent these different types of industries where they are leading their position. Also, another indicator which I think quite indicative is the overseas acquisitions of companies from the BRIC countries. And also, if you try to follow this trend, since 2000, the number, this graph shows the number of deals, like merger and acquisitions that were conducted by companies that represent these 4 countries. And the overall trend also telling us that companies and state-owned companies, but also private companies, being very actively supported by their home governance, becoming more and more internationalized. And what implication it has for the global economy, but also for the functioning of the free market in those countries, but also in the developed countries, I will touch upon in a minute. So what does what explain actually, what does explain the success factors of those companies that become more and more internationalized and the expansion of corporations that represent the emerging markets? First of all, many scholars say that the ability to learn from the developed countries has improved largely in those countries, and it's also that most of those countries have been exposed to globalization. This all has been a very important factor for the success stories of many multinational corporations from these economies. It's also very sophisticated and improved governance style and also way. For example, Brazil is being very well known for introducing the concept of indirect management of economic assets. Here I'm talking about the state assets. So the government has decreased largely the number of its shares in state-owned companies, but for example, it decreased from 70% of ownership to 30 to 25. By this, the government sought, first of all, to improve the corporate governance and to make the governance mechanisms more effective and the whole functioning of the corporation more efficient. But at the same time, having these minority shares, it also planned to retain control, the strategic control over this, for example, particular company. Also, another very important aspect is the adoption of innovations and technologies that many of those companies have not only adopted, but also have been pursuing in different markets. And here, before I come, of course, to the case of Kazakhstan, I would like to say that but this particular aspect of openness to globalization and ability to learn from developed economies is something that is peculiar and very characteristic of the Kazakhstan's economy. And I will touch upon how it works in the case of Kazakhstan also later in my presentation. So, very often governments of these emerging economies are characterized as countries with state capitalism in the fact that they let the private sector grow and tighten control over the strategic industries. This is also one of the core characteristic and the difference of this new type of state capitalism if we compare it to the previous stages. It's also, as I mentioned on the previous slide, it's also more effective corporate governance and ownership structures for state-owned enterprises. It's also the fact, if you look at the number of professional top managers that are invited and recruited by those companies, the number has also increased largely. And also, like employees from these corporations, they also trained and get, for example, obtain their education in the leading Western universities. And after that, they return to their home countries, take the leading position in those enterprises, and then try to put those companies on a market track in terms of their operations and functioning. If you look at this graph, which may look a bit complicated at the first sight, we will see one interesting tendency that relates to the point that the government let the private sector grow in some industries while it's actually deepening its control over other industries. And if we look at 4 countries like Brazil, China, India, and Arab Emirates on the examples of 6 industries, we will see that, for example, energy is pretty much controlled and being described as a strategic industry for the governments of these 4 countries in terms of the degree of regulation, in terms of the share of state ownerships, of state assets in those companies. It's also very much the financial industry. You can follow it a bit like this. It also belongs to the group of strategic industries. It's then also less so, but still it's communications, but also infrastructure. If you look at the other side after this dividing line, we'll see the examples of non-strategic industries as they are defined in those 4 countries. So, for example, it's retail, it's also very much pharmaceuticals. In the case of India, it's also communications technology. So, why I'm presenting this? It's important to see that over time, the governments in those countries, they proposed and selected a very deliberate strategy of having more control, more effective control over the strategic industries, while providing more sort of market freedom to the industries, like presented on the left side. And those industries can be characterized as, compared to these ones, as probably less capital intensive. And this is also a very important point when I come to the example of Kazakhstan. Here, my book that I'd like to present to you was the main research question that I asked in the whole book: what type of market-oriented economy has emerged in Kazakhstan? And the book was first presented at the George Washington University in October this year. And there's also some booklets with the short description of the book. So now coming to the case of Kazakhstan, I would like to give you some background information on development of the country, so that you could have a better idea and understanding of the conditions for the reform path that the government chose since independence. Well, officially, since the early 90s, the government and the President Nazarbayev often stressed the fact that there are 3 main pillars of the development strategy for Kazakhstan, and they are strong market economy, active state's role, and also attraction of foreign direct investment. Also, President Nazarbayev regularly stressed that in the economy of Kazakhstan, in the development of Kazakhstan, economy should come first and then comes politics. This also relates to the overall reform strategy of the country. At the same time, there are also a few unique, I would say, elements of the Kazakhstan development path. First of all, unlike many resource-rich countries, Kazakhstan largely privatized its energy sector, because usually by theory, it's assumed that countries that have lots of resources, they wouldn't let foreign actors to come and invest in the energy sector. So Kazakhstan actually was very open since the early 90s to foreign investors, and in particular in the energy sector. It was also open to FDI, and it's one of the also leading countries in terms of the attracting of FDI compared to other countries of the former Soviet Union. And by different measures, it also managed to avoid resource curse to the different degree, of course, but still it had a huge problem in the economy. And because of this very market-oriented reform path, the US and the EU recognized in the early 2000s Kazakhstan officially as a country that has a market economy. Also, if you look at some of the indicators of economic development, we'll see some interesting trends. Of course, the economy of Kazakhstan largely depends on the export of energy resources, and after the production of oil has increased after 2000, also the GDP per capita has increased, unemployment rate decreased, and also the Gini coefficient slightly decreased and then remained at the stable level. And here I say so that you're not really confused. These indicators, they are adjusted just for the ease of illustration. Although different indicators are used, of course, for Gini index and also for unemployment rate. But this is so that you could have a full picture of how the situation looked like in this regard in the country. So since I was interested what type of market-oriented economy has emerged, I decided to do a qualitative cross-sectional interview study, because in the case of Kazakhstan, there were some issues and concerns as regards the availability of reliable data, first of all, in the economic realm, but then also the concerns of institutional dynamics. That is also very difficult to obtain without having access to the primary data. And also, at that time, I saw that economic and political actors whom I interviewed in my study and whom I'll present in a minute, they are also very important actors, and they can be viewed as being subjects and object of economic processes, to the degree that, first of all, of course, they are shaped, these actors, by economic processes, by the reform strategy, but at the same time, they also can be viewed as being direct decision makers and those who actually also shape those many of the economic processes. And before doing the study, already some of the definitions existed of what, from the institutional point of view, what the economy of Kazakhstan is and how it looks. And a few examples just show you that it has been seen as a sort of a mixture between the liberal economy and also very much dominated by the state. As, for example, Spechler put it as a state-led capitalist economy. In my approach, I use the following framework. It's the varieties of capitalism approach. That is a theoretical framework which is very much firm-centered. Then I proceeded with using core-periphery framework, and in the end, I came up and elaborated the sort of the combination of these two theoretical frameworks. And why I did that, I will also tell you in a minute. So first of all, the VOC approach also, probably you're aware, but just a few words of what is it about. The VOC approach is the institutional perspective to assess, that was used first in the early 2000s by Hall and Soskis, and it was also put forward by the scholars, to assess the different types of capitalist economies that can be found either in Anglo-Saxon countries or in continental Europe. So it's basically in the Western world. And he came up with two main perspectives of the institutional structure that differ as regards industrial relations, as regards corporate governance, inter-firm relations, vocational education and training, as well as social security system. And in each of those dimensions, each of the group of countries has its own distinct characteristics which differ from those in the other group of countries. And the key point here is that, if we try to summarize it in one sentence, is that in the liberal market economies, relations between the economic actors are very much shaped by the market, and there's little coordination between them. So there's more competition between the companies operating in this dimension. While if we go to coordinated market economy, we found more coordination between private economic actors. And for example, employer association that combine and that unite many actors in one particular industry is a good example of this. So there's more coordination, more exchange of information between competitors compared to the Anglo-Saxon countries. And I applied this framework to assess and to identify the type of the economy in Kazakhstan. So for my study, I conducted 159 interviews with the following categories of respondents. As you can see, I tried to cover as many different categories as possible, and I didn't really seek to achieve high representation in for example, econometric terms. Rather, it was more to have as many different opinions and different perspectives on the Kazakhstan's economy as possible. So, as for industries and respondents, I focused on the main and sort of the strategic industries. Also, I selected those industries, as you see, based on their overall contribution to the GDP. By that, I was hoping to have also a better representation of economic actors that would represent the main industries in the economy. So I interviewed high-ranking public officials like the members of the parliament, also several vice ministers, and also heads of state committees, regional public officials, also company CEOs, directors of employee associations and trade unions. And here, I would like to tell you just a few words about, of course, first of all, about the results, but then also, if you recall my point about the importance of overall openness of Kazakhstan to the, say, external forces. Since early 90s, Kazakhstan has been very active in terms of learning from the experiences of other countries, and this table shows you which were those countries and models that the government of Kazakhstan learned lessons from. For example, if you take public administration, it followed the EU model and also the model of that was in Singapore. Also, tax system, you can see South Korea, the US, pension system, the Chilean model. It means that the government actually recruited people from those countries to advise the government on those reforms in these particular sectors. And also, by this, it was very important from the view that the exchange also of information, also the exposure of different domestic actors in the economy was also very high. Also, this is, I think, very interesting compared, for example, to other countries of Central Asia that have not been that, for example, open to external sources of influence. And so, if we now keep this in mind, this particular point that the government first based their reforms on these different experiences, we can put the economy in this format. So, actually, very often, many international organizations and also maybe foreign investors view Kazakhstan as a very homogeneous market. But in fact, it's quite heterogeneous because, as I said, first, the economy has been exposed to external influences, and also it has very much to do also with Soviet past dependence. So in the economy, you can find a lot of actors that still, for example, work in this Soviet framework in terms of the taking decisions, in terms of doing business and so on. Then we have also, of course, the Western business culture. It's that represented by local and foreign firms, in the sense that there are many foreign companies that operate in the country, and of course they also bring their own culture of doing business. Also, local companies that are established in the country, they are established by local entrepreneurs who, for example, have education from abroad, and then they, for example, also have some experience in doing business, and then they return back home and try to do business in a new way. We also have domestic business culture that is largely based on the local, I would say, local sort of characteristics that has very much to do with the Asian style of doing business. And also, finally, we also have very much of influence from foreign companies. For example, many respondents pointed that if companies come from Japan, then they usually try to stick together. They try to coordinate their relations, exchange information about the market, as it was, for example, the case when I presented to you the varieties of capitalism approach. So companies from, like Japanese companies, they still continue to pursue these strategies that they adopt in their home countries. The same with the companies from the US, who largely try to compete and try to bring more competition by pursuing the strategies that are widely adopted in the US. And so these different forces of influences, of course, add to a large degree to the what I called core-periphery market-oriented economy of Kazakhstan. First of all, the definition of this framework and also of this theoretical approach. The core-periphery was invented, this whole framework was invented by me during the whole process of data analysis. And first of all, it helped to eliminate the shortcomings of the VOC approach to the extent that the VOC approach does not account for a big role of the state in terms of coordinating economic relations. And also, second, is that it also helped to account for the institutional dynamics. So while the VOC approach says that it's very difficult for institutional change to take place in a developed economy, because most of the institutions in the developed economy, they are resistant to change because there are institutional complementarities and effectiveness. It was not able to, this concept was not able to explain the sort of success of and the kind of very rapid reform path that Kazakhstan has pursued since 1991. And so the core part of the economy, so if you see it as a sort of institutional structure, so there are two sub-structures within one economy. First is the core economy that is heavily dominated by the state, and it's represented by state-owned companies as well as big foreign and private companies. Then we also have the periphery economy, which is more market-oriented and mainly represented by small and medium-sized companies. And if we look at it from this perspective, we will see it as follows. This is probably kind of the main finding of my work, and it shows that the state-led core represented mainly by big companies, which means that those companies represent mainly high capital-intensive industries, for example, like the energy sector or natural resources. Unlike state-led core, companies in the periphery are represented by SMEs with low capital intensity of industries. For example, almost all segments of the sector of the service industry belong to the periphery. It's very important to note that actors in the two parts of the economy, they enjoy and kind of reap benefits of either being in the core or the periphery. And it's also important to note that there are both, of course, advantages and disadvantages of being in one of these two parts. For example, companies in the core, although they experience heavy state regulation, at the same time, they also argue that we can also have more predictable investment regime so that the government tries to guarantee security of our investments. While companies in the periphery say that, well, there's little state regulation and we don't have to do so much with the bureaucracy on a daily basis, and there's actually very little intervention from the state. At the same time, they also claim that there's a problem that the investment regime itself for them is less predictable. It means it's a more chaotic. While companies in the core say that they have good access to finance, companies in the periphery claim that they have limited access to finance and to different sources of finance in the economy. And the same as companies in the core argue that for them the tax regime is rather burdensome, tax administration is also difficult, and the taxes themselves are quite high. Companies in the periphery say that actually the tax regime is quite attractive. And I'll also show you the examples of that. So overall, this points to the fact that companies that operate in close collaboration with the state, they are less vulnerable to different types of external shocks, also to different types of shocks within the economy. While companies in the periphery, although they enjoy more economic freedom, they also at the same time more vulnerable to different types of external shocks. And for example, the economic crisis of 2008 clearly demonstrate this, that companies actually in the core were less vulnerable and they less suffered from it, while companies in the periphery they suffered most in that. And also the government helped the industries in the core to recover from this economic crisis. Here's also one important point that I would like to mention is that many scholars and also representatives of international organizations in their research of Kazakhstan, they often look only at this core part of the economy. They mainly look at the energy sector, natural resources. Of course, their contribution to the GDP is big, and if you try to assess, I would say that 70% of GDP comes from the core, while 30% are generated by the periphery. And yet, many scholars tend to look only at the core, and then they make generalizations to the entire economy, saying that looking at the, for example, the type of regulation, type of governance, type of state-business relations, then they also claim that the same type of relations also can be found in the other sectors of the economy. So they just basically generalize based on one particular sector. While in my study I found that it really should be distinguished, and different types of market forces can be found in different parts of the economy. I think it's also very important to understand that there are some, in some industries, there are even more elements of a market economy than in the others. So also one interesting example as regards the periphery, as I said, there are also advantages of being either in the periphery or either in the core. So as regards, for example, the growth of companies, many companies in the periphery, once they grow, what they often do in order to receive those benefits of being in periphery, they split the companies in 2 or 3 or even more. Because they say by doing this, we will rather enjoy most of those benefits that can be found in the periphery. The next slide also, I think, quite interesting in terms of the concept of innovative state capitalism, and also, as I said, this key point that the government tightens its control over the strategic industries, and also let some of the parts of the private sector grow. Also, if you look at the EBRD transition progress, we'll see that over time, since 1998, the share of private sector has increased in the economy of Kazakhstan, so from 55 to 70. Then, of course, this was the economic crisis that strengthened the role of the state. And yet we see that the tendency is there, that overall the share of the private sector has increased in the country. This also, I think, very indicative of this point that country with this innovative state capitalism, as I said, they rather optimize their control over strategic industries and give more freedom to the remaining private sectors and actors. And now, if we again come back to this graph that I presented before and try to place Kazakhstan compared to the other 4 countries, we will see that by the degree of regulation and also by the degree of sort of the state assets in the economy, it's also very much following the pattern that is adopted and can be found in these 4 other economies. Like energy, of course, dominates the economy. Then we have financial industry, communications, with infrastructure being somewhere in between. For example, as regards all the huge infrastructure projects, then they're, of course, very much promoted, controlled, and owned by state corporations. But if we talk about sort of less strategic infrastructure projects that are implemented on the local, regional levels, then companies operate more in a sort of market-oriented environment with little participation and intervention from the state. Also, if you recall the point as regards the fact that more and more top managers from different countries and companies are invited to better manage and to better control the state-owned companies. Here, just a few examples of those companies, like Samruk Kazina, as you know, is the main state holding in the country that is run by Richard Evans, who is the independent director. They've been also, his predecessors were also from foreign countries. Also, if you take the Air Astana company, that's a leading air company, or was say one of the leading companies in Eurasia, it's Peter Foster. And after he came to manage the company has made significant progress. And since it's a state-owned company, it also shows how the government tries to sort of optimize the management and corporate governance practices. So basically by adopting best practices through invitation of these top managers. And also Veysel Aral, the CEO of telecommunications company Kcell. Actually, there's also even one specific exception for the heads of companies. They don't have to have a work permit. So if a person is invited to work to lead a state-owned company, then he gets the work permit automatically without any formal processes. This is also a way that the government does in order to recruit those individuals. And we also know that, for example, Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister of the UK, was invited along with his team to consult and advise the government on different economic reforms in the country in 2012. So if we then also look at the way how, if there's any progress in public administration reform, we see that also that the government has made several interesting initiatives. One of them is the Bolashak program. That's the education program that was introduced in the 90s with the aim to help, for example, students to get Western education and then return back home to work within 5 years for the state. Since recently, the requirement has changed from working only in the state sector, also that individuals who come back after graduating using the Bolashak scholarship, they can also work now in the private sector. But the key point is that they have to come back. And in my study, I also found many representatives of this Bolashak program who have more, I would say, sort of the sort of Western-oriented mindset, and then who also try to promote some of the strategies of the market strategies at different levels in the country. Then the government of Kazakhstan has been also very active in terms of introducing new public management, also the electronic government to optimize and also to reduce the burden of bureaucracy, of the red tape. By this also helping the private sector to develop. And as one expert whom I interviewed said that in Kazakhstan it's also very easy to meet with public officials for an interview. And this was also very much the case in my study, because if you look at the number of interviews that I did, of course, I did many of the interviews by using the snowball strategy. So basically, I arranged my interviews by using, for example, contacts from other respondents. And yet, what I found interesting is also that it's probably indicative of this overall trend and quite this innovative feature of the Kazakhstan's economy that also more and more people were also contacted directly, which means that I didn't have to use any personal contacts to arrange an interview. And in the case of public officials, actually, 22 public officials out of 24 agreed to be interviewed. First, it shows their high degree of openness and also readiness to talk. And out of 22 of the public officials that I interviewed, 19 of them were approached by using the direct contact. That also shows that something has really changed with respect to the attitude of public officials towards the, for example, social sciences, which, for example, was not the case in the 90s, but also in terms of making the whole reform path more, I would say, market-oriented. So what are the main conclusions? Based on my study and based on the analysis of my interviews, it's important to note that this is not particularly my own thinking and my own idea, but rather this is the main finding based on the analysis of the interviews, is that there have been some balance between state and market regulation of the economy has been found, at least from the point of view of those decision makers and representatives of companies whom I interviewed. This also allows me to say that and to argue that there's more market regulation than it's usually viewed by international organizations, for example. And here again, I pointed to the fact that most of the studies, they largely focus on the energy sector, disregarding the rest and disregarding the other processes that take place in other industries. Also, I think one very interesting example is that after the customs union came into force in 2010, the number of small and medium-sized companies from Russia increased almost three times, yeah. So if you look at the number of Russian companies that registered in Kazakhstan before 2010, it was much smaller. But after 2010, because of the because of the fewer tariffs and also because of the easier access to the market of Kazakhstan, more and more Russian companies began to register their businesses in Kazakhstan. And this also points to the, I would say, this more market-oriented and easy operating environment for many companies, also less bureaucracy and also lower taxation rates that can be observed in the periphery section of the Kazakhstan economy. So this all and my whole study adds probably to the concept of varieties of emerging capitalist economies, which I think is also very important and quite a new concept that scholars need to closely look at. So what's the future of innovative state capitalism? No, first of all, as I said, there have been so many different observations that are quite new, quite innovative, that require new analytical tools. And of course, scholars have to think of how to approach the changing and modifying nature of, for example, governance practices, also the practices of managing state-owned companies by using new analytical tools. Also, this brings us to the following questions. Having the examples of like China, Brazil, India, also in that case we can see Kazakhstan, it's also important to ask whether state capitalism is a transition model, so that those countries are moving over time towards a liberal market economy, or this innovative type of capitalism that they produce, that they generate, is it more like the ultimate goal, let's say the ultimate goal of those economies? So it's also very important, I think, questions that require further research and further studies. So at this note, I'd like to thank you once again for being very attentive, and I'm very eager to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roman. And we open up for questions and answers. I'll circulate the microphone if you need. Roman, before we start the questions, is your book published already?
Yes, it was published already. It was published by Peter Lang Press, and actually you can find the booklets, as I said, there, with a small description.
Every book launch seminar deserves some commercial. So Christmas time, that could be a good present.
Yeah, thank you.
Questions and answers.
Yes.
Well, I have to use this one. I wonder, to me, it's much of what you describe doesn't appear very new. I mean, the Japanese did this in late 19th century. Mm-hmm. This systematic use of the state apparatus to develop large companies and things like that. So that is one thing. When it comes to the present analysis, I think the most striking thing is less that these state companies become more kind of powerful in direct way, but they become more similar to regular private companies. So, for example, you can see it very clear, for example, here in Norway, when you can see the wages of CEOs in state companies are pretty close now to the private companies. 20 years back, they only had a fraction of the income, without these people becoming more innovative than the former leaders. So it's a lot of things. So my impression for most countries is that rather that the state has become more powerful, you have the leading multinational companies have become more powerful and have a lot of control over the different states. So the states are to a higher degree captured than before.
Yeah.
If you're able to answer shortly, we can take more points.
Yeah.
Is it okay to answer each question in turn?
Yeah, I think I can start, and then we'll continue like this. Well, I agree with you, Jens. I mean, the concept itself is not that new because it was practiced by many other countries. It's probably quite new in the case of Kazakhstan because given its very short period of development since 1991 to 2014, and this very striking change from the command type of the economy to more sort of the market-oriented, using more market means. As for the sort of the global state capitalism, I agree. It's just becoming more and more sophisticated in terms of its forms, and also you rightly pointed that the difference between the corporate governance and management practices in the state-owned companies is somewhat becoming similar to the ones that are practiced by private companies. And this mixture of the private and state-owned kind of state elements is very of course, very puzzling, and I think it requires also further research, especially now, given that there are different types of ways that, for example, Chinese companies use to expand to other markets. So I fully agree with you.
Hi. Oh, that worked. To continue a bit more on the Chinese perspective of things, as mentioned, I found it really fascinating to read the treatise, as it is very closely related to China's development experience in many ways. However, the impression I've gotten is that when it comes to using the market rationale to guide the state-owned companies and so forth, Kazakhstan has overtaken China extensively. And China is currently very much in a transition where they seek to drive further the marketization of their economic sector. However, they are meeting significant resistance due to vested interest among the political and economic elites of the Chinese political system. Mm-hmm. And given that China and Kazakhstan politically has probably more in common than China and than Kazakhstan and say Japan, it's really interesting to see just how Kazakhstan manages to tackle the challenges that comes from vested interests in an authoritarian political system when it comes to modernizing the economy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We'll collect more, right?
I'm Nils Andreas Masvi, work in DNVGL, responsible for Russia and Kazakhstan from the head office. I know the oil energy sector a little bit better than the other sectors, but when I saw your list of state-owned companies from BRIC countries being leading, I saw, for instance, Gazprom #1 in the world. So I just wonder what was the leading indicator there? Was it market capitalization? Was it production? I mean, because in referring to vested interest, could it be that it is the residual of market freedom pockets that still are alive in state capitalist countries that are giving the relative success, and not the fact that big sectors are state controlled per se? And I just give one example. If you compare the Rosneft resource base and production base with Exxon's resource base and production base, you see that the market capitalization of Exxon is 5 or 6 times bigger than Rosneft. So is it really value adding to have state control of these sectors?
Thank you.
Would you like to answer this?
Yeah. Thank you, Björn. Thank you for your very interesting observation and comment as regards similarities and differences in China and Kazakhstan. I would still say that the progress that has been achieved, I would rather say that it has been significant, but still it was rather modest also compared to other countries. And probably in the case of Kazakhstan, it's a smaller country, of course, small economy. There's also less diversification in terms of the industrial production. And also I think there is more forces that are interested in having stability in the economic realm. So it's a different different interest groups that are interested in having this stability. So from this perspective, I don't know so much the situation in China, but I would assume that the challenge that, for example, China is facing is much bigger, and we are talking about, of course, of a different scale, also in terms of the implementing reforms and also dealing with different types of, as you said, vested interests. But nevertheless, I also see that there are some quite interesting similarities that may need some further studies or of a comparative study between Kazakhstan and China. Coming back to your question, I think it's also very relevant and interesting. As for that table that was put forward by by different scholars, and they used an approach that they tried to use as many indicators as possible in terms of putting those brands as being number one, number two. So it's also its market capitalization. It's also a presence in as many countries as possible. So basically expansion strategies. It's also the marketing. So basically how many customers each of those companies, for example, has. And also I think it's degree of internationalization that those companies pursue in their strategies. This was used as a sort of indicator to put those in that list. And of course, as for whether energy sector needs always to be regulated either by the state or by the market, or it should be a mixture of both. I think the debate on that is still ongoing, but it's clearly interesting to see that while some countries try to use more innovative strategies to improve the management of the strategic industries, some countries still stick to the sort of more traditional ways and instruments of managing those sectors. But when it comes, for example, to cooperation between those two different companies, I think, in many cases we see that this more, I would say, new and innovative ways and governance practices are then in the end adopted when it comes to the regulation of a certain, for example, energy field and so on, because by using this more, I would say, market-oriented way and sort of the less state participation would also provide more benefits the global market, because this is how the global market is currently driven. So it's still driven very much by liberal forces.
My name is Indra Øvland. I'm here at NUPI. And Jens had a comment on this innovative state capitalism. And as far as I understood, Jens understood it as meaning a new form of, that innovative means new form of state capitalism. And he was saying, well, maybe it's not so new. And I think that's probably what you mean by too. You mean a new form of state capitalism. But innovative state capitalism could also be thought of as meaning a form of state capitalism with where there is a lot of innovation in the economy, which could lead to some confusion. And I guess my impression is that there is no innovation in the Kazakh economy. There is no new technology or major science coming out of Kazakhstan. And what there is instead is there is a lot of investment. So the state has a lot of money from natural resources, and it has a willingness to invest, looking far into the future. It invests in infrastructure and a new capital, and it invests in human capital. But it invests probably not very well in human capital because it invests for prestige instead of for effect. So whereas primary education is usually the most efficient thing to invest in, mostly invest for a few people to go to famous universities abroad. And that brings me on to that you mentioned that Kazakhstan had largely overcome the resource curse. And to me, it looks like Kazakhstan is a typically resource-cursed country. Lots of money, spending a lot, and when the oil price falls, things will get difficult. And it's also worth thinking that the period you are talking about, mainly the last 10 years, the oil price has steadily gone up. The oil curse is something, or the resource curse is something you see when commodities go into their typical price cycles, which we may just be beginning to see now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Indra.
In order to temper this difficult question, I will make an easy one. Do you know there is this survey carried out by the World Bank Enterprise Survey?
Yeah.
And that's very useful because it provides a lot of information in many emerging economies about how firms perceive their economic and political environments. Mm-hmm. So many of the variables that are available there fit exactly very well with the type of questions and topics that you're analyzing here. And then the question is, if I remember correctly, then I saw that there is a new survey now, data available for Kazakhstan. So it's a simply suggestion about whether you thought about using them in the past or whether you can use them in the future.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, So we'll then stick to these 2 questions. Thank you, Indra, for your very detailed sort of comment on many aspects of my presentation. With some of them I agree, with some I have maybe slightly different view. Well, first of all, yes, the word innovative can be seen as having different meanings. And by the meaning that I had, I sought to reflect upon the fact that countries with state capitalism, they use more and more innovative instruments and tools. So basically, they use more and more market tools to achieve their, for example, political goals, and also to achieve some economic development, progress as regards economic development. So while before it was more that those instruments were very much traditional, very much dominated by the state and also promoted by the state, today the state uses more and more private actors to achieve exactly the same goals as these regimes with state capitalism has had before. What is new, I think, here and innovative is the kind of the way and the more sophisticated types of instruments that they use. As regards also, if we look at it from the perspective as to what extent innovations have been adopted and developed in the country, I agree with you. There's a big difference, of course, also compared to China. And we know that China is making big progress as regards adopting new technologies and also inventing them and then promoting globally. As regards Kazakhstan, of course, there have been many attempts to promote technologies, new technologies, and at the moment there are 17 special economic zones. Some of them were created after 2000, some of them recently, and each of them has different types of course, programs and also the different types of industries that they're working on. And of course, in many cases, they're not so effective, and the sort of the output of this program has not been that significant yet. And one of the problems is, of course, the lack of human capital and this huge gap in terms of education that has to do with the Soviet past dependence and also the lack of this sort of innovative entrepreneurial traditions. And that's why exactly one could assume that, well, if it doesn't work, why to bother? We could still have, for example, revenue from oil exports and so on. But at the same time, as I pointed in some examples, the government tried to fill this gap by inviting like top managers and also other qualified employees to run some of the state-owned companies, but also private companies, to make them also first more effective and also more, I would say, sort of better prepared and equipped for operating at the global market. And for example, if you take this, as I said, Air Astana company, it has made a huge progress in this regard. And also now more and more people are also invited and recruited who, for example, work in the Silicon Valley or in other such economic zones that produce innovations to come and bring some new experience to Kazakhstan. But I agree there's a long way to go in this respect. Of course, as you rightly pointed, significant investments have been done and have been channeled to the infrastructure projects. That's for sure. It's also the construction of Astana, the current capital, is also one example of that. And it's also, I think, it's also actually your idea that by this the government also sought to minimize the risks of resource curse by investing the excessive revenue from the oil exports to these huge infrastructure projects. And I also agree that the country depends on the global oil price. And but at the same time, of course, there are countries that were not that effective in terms of being resource rich and managing the economies. And even though there was overall growth in oil production, I would say that without effective institutions that have been put in place, the government, the governance and the management of this oil and gas resources would hardly be sustainable, as it was the case in Kazakhstan from 2000 to 2010. But I agree, there's, of course, this sort of the institutional structure of the economy. It's difficult to say whether it's sustainable in the long run and how it will be affected in case the oil prices will further fall down over a very protracted period. Fulvio, coming to your question, which is also, I think, very interesting and very relevant as regards this World Bank BEPS indicators, which estimate the degree of, first of all, state regulation, bureaucracy, and the level of bureaucracy. Also, it helps to identify the major obstacles that private companies face with. And I also use this the study of the World Bank form that is also presented in the book. The thing is that in many ways the results of this report and of the studies have been complementary and also provided very interesting insights. But at the same time, they don't cover all the different aspects. They mainly focus on companies that, for example, of a medium and small size, and they also do not, as far as I know, do not cover all the industries. So in that case, these reports of the World Bank were complementary, but in my study I tried to make it as big a picture as possible, trying to cover all the most important industries.
Let's see if there are some other questions before we close.
Roman, thank you for a presentation. Well, it is pretty much clear that this important industries includes in a significant way the natural monopolies, right? And it is a world-known practice that natural monopolies, it's a market failure. So it needs to be somehow regulated or controlled. And I suppose that this state capitalism is a one way to address this problem. However, if you find some kind of a way to avoid this problem or to make this natural monopolies 100% effective, then you'll probably get a Nobel Prize. But still, you're claiming in your research that this state capitalism is one of the most interesting ways to address this problem, as far as I understood. And you're showing us the example of Kazakhstan. However, I have this doubts about it because we all know that the state regulation and state ownership leads to some inefficiencies, like rent-seeking problem and all the things. And the best example of inefficiency in Kazakhstan of the state-regulated company would be probably the Kashagan case. We know that private company or private owner would never allow to its assets to depreciate at that extent that the equipment is not usable and not functionable. But in Kazakhstan it happened. And this is a perfect way to explain this rent-seeking problem and probably these inefficiencies related to the state ownership and state control. Probably there is kind of a secret of Kazakhstan, of corporate governance that lead to in a 90% of cases to the success. To the successful governance. Maybe you can share, because this presentation is, as far as I understood, is more in a macro level, whereas it's more interesting to look at the micro level in order to understand this tendency or philosophy of the government to control. Maybe there is some kind of a way, and it will be really interesting to look at it. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Erik Holtedal. I'm an independent consultant. You touched upon some aspects of public management and also mentioned that leading politicians are more easily available in Kazakhstan than in, for instance, Russia. To what extent is Kazakhstan burdened by the problem of corruption in comparison with other more or less smart authoritarian governments, as you name them?
Thank you. First is the question from Danyar. I think this is basically the point that you mentioned is something that can be done in a further follow-up study to make several in-depth cases of how, for example, the regulation of a certain industry or even a certain energy, for example, project is done, and how it then relates, to, for example, to my findings. Basically my key point was rather to try to make as general picture as possible. But I agree, of course, there is no homogeneity in terms of the effectiveness of different projects or large-scale projects that are implemented in Kazakhstan. And while some have been successful, some of them failed. And this also relates to, for example, many projects on diversification of the economy. Part of the problem is that there have been some criticism of the government that some of the excessive oil revenues, first of all, they accumulated in the sovereign wealth fund that is built largely according to the structure of the Norwegian wealth fund. But then some of these revenues then are spent not for developing other industries or diversifying the economy, but then they again being channeled to the energy sector. So the government gets the sort of the surplus, gets revenues from the energy experts, and then it redirects this new sort of revenues again to further develop the energy sector. And this is a problem that is often mentioned, and that's probably also one of the reasons why some of the projects in the other industries, for example, are less effective. As regards the point that you mentioned, that state capitalism and state regulation is not successful and it's inefficient, I think that many scholars have different views on that, and they all claim that depending on a particular stage of country's development, a different degree of state regulation can be justified, and it's even necessary. And also the economic crisis has shown that many of the liberal market economies, they strengthen the role of the state to cope with the consequences of the economic crisis. So there are different points on that. I think with the state capitalism, it's important to understand that many countries use this model because this particular model, as I think Aron Acemoglu put it, this model helps to achieve the goals of economic development without radical reform in the political sector. And this is, I think, very important because it helps to have, I would say, more incremental change for example, in the political system. So there is no, I would say, no risks, no big risks to the current elite in terms of possible changes from having this more state-led type of management of the economy. As for your question regarding the public management and also the level of corruption, first of all, I should say that looking at different types of indicators and also looking at different types of rankings, the situation that we have is somewhat different. For example, we know that the Kazakhstan's position on the Transparency International Index is quite low. At the same time, if I come back to these BIPS indicators, indicators of this enterprise survey pursued by the World Bank, and if you look at the reports of early 2000 compared to the reports of the last years, we'll see that such a problem as corruption has become less important for private companies. So when they were asked, what do you see as the main obstacle at the moment? Today they more and more see, like, for example, tax administration problem or problems with licensing and so on, while corruption playing a somewhat smaller role. So this brings me to the point that probably in order to assess this issue, the problem of corruption, we need to look at different sectors individually, because one thing, we have overall picture where Kazakhstan is not doing that well, but then you talk, for example, to private entrepreneurs that represent small and medium-sized business, then the situation there seems to be changing over time. So this also does not allow me to make a very kind of firm conclusion on the situation. And also as regards, for example, the ranking, the ease of doing business, Kazakhstan has also made a huge progress in this regard from the position of, I think it was position of, I think, after in the group of countries from 100 to 130, and then over 10 years, last year it was number 50 in this ease of doing business ranking. So I mean, of course, they all show different stories, but at the same time, they also point that this problem probably is differently viewed and perceived in different sectors.
Is there any more question, point of reflection? Roman invites here also to feelings, sentiments, so whatever you like to express before we close.
The basic education system was mentioned. I'd just like to give one testimonial, because our company has a trainee program where we recruit graduates from around the world, and we train them for 2 years at the head office before we send them back to the countries. And we did the same in Kazakhstan. We've done it a few times, and we had this prejudice that after the fall of the Soviet Union, the academics left, and that schools and universities were not in good shape. We were, however, positively very surprised about the high quality and high, the super attitude of all our Kazakh trainees. So we have been very, very impressed by the educational level and the work ethic and the willingness to go back to Kazakhstan after the trainee period and to continue working there. So we were positively impressed by the educational system, the basic educational system in Kazakhstan, I can say.
I have just some pet thing of mine, and it has to do with the path dependence. You talked about modernization of the public administration in Kazakhstan, a new public management, but one of the key feature of that is to management by objectives, and the largest and most refined system, or formal system for management by objectives, were the old Soviet planning system. So I was, with the refined mathematical analysis, so I wondered, had any one of these survived, and when Kazakh administrators are looking at this new public management, can they build on something on the old system?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jens. Maybe just yeah. Okay, very good. I think you're right to the sense that the basic education system is one of the best in the world, actually, because I think it's even number one by one of the World Bank ranking in terms of the access to education and also kind of the quality of the basic education. So it's even ranked first. But then the problem starts when it comes to the graduate, postgraduate education, because there are not. I mean, there's a huge gap between the needs of the labor market and those graduates who just get new education or they're freshly graduated from the universities, and this problem is trying to be solved, but it's still a long way to go, and that's why the country relies also so much on foreign workforce in this regard. And Jens, thank you for your very good comment. In fact, you're completely right that modernization implies more effective implementation of the set objectives and the control of the progress of these objectives. In Kazakhstan, it's very striking that also it's based on my study when I talked, for example, to representatives of private companies who work with the central government. They all pointed that there are lots of very competent and professional bureaucrats, and it's easy basically to coordinate many of the activities with them. While if you go to the regional levels, most of the local mayors and also bureaucrats at the local level, they still very much have the Soviet mindset, and they didn't participate in, for example, different types of trainings. For example, they didn't take part in this Bolshak program, because all the Bolshak graduates, after they return, they mainly work either in Astana or in Almaty. So basically, they stay at the central level because they don't find the working conditions very attractive at the regional level. And that's why the company representatives mentioned that it's striking when you have very much business type of relations with the central government, then you come down to the level of the region and you try to implement a particular project there. You face with the problem that those bureaucrats, they pose many different types of obstacles, and then this whole process slows down the implementation of a project, because in that case, the company has to return again to the central level, try to communicate with their partners there in order that they could influence the regional governments in implementing this particular project. So I would say it's still very much the divide between the central government and the regional bureaucrats in terms of the Soviet past dependence. And on this note, thank you very much for your attention. It was a pleasure to have you as an audience today. Thank you.